Alright, to get started out on the first step of doing your engine tuck is to make sure that you have everything that you need set up and ready to go the way that you need it on the engine. That way you don't have to redo any wiring in the future, in case you mess up, you forget something. So I've got the starter bolted onto the tranny bolted onto the motor. I do not have the speed sensor unit here. But I do know where that plug needs to go, so that's no big deal. I have a reverse switch put in. I've got the distributor. I have the coil. I did get the front water outlet changed, so we now have a coolant temperature switch on there. We have the initial one on the thermostat housing. We're going to be ditching the butterfly assembly from this intake completely, so I went ahead and just took that out real quick and dropped the intake down. It's just sitting on here for the moment while we get the wiring done. We're going to also be deleting the EGR, so I took the EGR valve off of there, and we'll make a bolt-on block-off plate for that too. Start it off. Figure, like I told you guys, I wanted the initial plugs of our wire harness to end up, roughly right out under the intake manifold. So I made a couple different brackets with some clamp loops that are insulated to be able to hold our wiring where we're going to need it to go. One's going to be running off of the the water pipe back here. That way we can sneak everything across from here and under back here. And then I made another one coming off the bottom of the intake to come back here so we can get those wires nice and nicely ran, out to where we're going to put the plugs. I'm probably going to also put one here on the side of the intake. That way we've got, a nice way to mount up the wiring that's going to go for the alternator. And yeah, all that I have left now is to go inside, get the show you guys all the supplies that I'm going to be using to make the harness. I did decide that we're going to do a replaceable, removable pigtail harness for the distributor and for the fuel injectors. So it is getting ready to storm out here. The lightning's coming, the wind is getting real crazy. So I'm going to pack up out here. We'll go inside where the cb7 engine harness is, and we'll get started with what we're going to need to do with the engine harness for the cb7, and what we're going to need to do with the prelude plugs once we're back out here at the motor to initially run all our wiring together. This is basically the materials that I'm going to be using to make my harness. I have multiple different types of heat shrink tubing and wrapping of different types. Marine heat shrink and standard heat shrink. A little bit of electrical tape. I've got my cutters. I have a pair of pliers, and I've got two different size multi-packs of some barrel crimps, which we will be using those for connecting all our wiring together. Solder creates brittle points on the wiring, and if they move around too much, you can break wires right off of solder. I don't like using standard butt connectors because they're bulky and they end up making like big fat pregnant spots, in your wiring, and we want to try to keep this as clean as possible. The proper barrel crimp is the preferred way to connect all these things together. So that's how we're going to be doing all the wiring, with little barrel crimps, heat shrink to cover the barrel crimps, and other assorted heat shrink to make our wire harness look nice and neat. So I'm going to start out with the distributor pigtail, and where I'm going to start is I'm going to locate the plug that's coming off the main portion of the passenger side harness. This one here that has all the main engine grounds. Coming off of that plug is where we have our original OBD1 distributor 8-wire plug. That's already pretty well separated from the rest of the distributor wiring, which it did have one black and white pin going from the distributor over here to this main plug coming to the what's going to be, that's the coil. So I depinned that one, and I know that when we put this harness back together, that this plug is going to have to probably have this wire extended to come back to where this plug is going to be. So to start everything out, is I'm going to, since I'm going to make this portion of my harness is going to be removable for the OBD1 and OBD2 differences, that I'm going to take this plug and shorten it up all the way initially to the plug that it actually initially runs out of. We'll put that one close to this plug so that we can make the other portion of our pigtail just clip in back here behind this side of the plug and be able to run up to our engine that way. So I'm going to go ahead and start off by one wire at a time. I'm going to shorten this up. I will use my little barrel crimps to crimp the wiring together. We'll slip some heat shrink over each barrel crimp. We'll get that nice and sealed up, and then we'll move on to the next plug that we'll work on. The body harness that we're putting in the car is from a 5-speed 92, and the engine harness that I'm sitting here working with happens to be out of a automatic 92. So there are some differences between the two that I'm going to have to remedy before moving on to the harness, where with this automatic, because of the extra wires for the two different sensors running off of the female plug, we have a 14 wire female plug, where off the body harness and original 5-speed harnesses there is a 10-pin female plug that belongs there on the harness, which kind of sucks because I like using the automatic harnesses to be able to run all my extra stuff like the VTEC and like knock sensor and anything else that I need to add extra into the car for doing the auto to 5-speed conversion. But we're gonna end up doing a full complete, true 5-speed conversion, I guess, on this car. So I had to go and search through all the harnesses and plugs that we have on the property, and magically I did find one 10-pin female plug that I will be able to depin this plug and correctly pin out the wires in this harness to match the 5-speed harness, and then I will have to find a couple different plugs to run the additional wires like the VTEC knock sensor and reverse lights and stuff like that. So also the speed sensor, I also had to track down the male 3-wire plug to change off from the 5-wire male plug that was on the automatic harness. And once I get those changed out, I can then begin to start the process of where we're going to start with the relocating the distributor. Once I started working on converting the automatic plug on the engine harness over to a plug for the 5-speed harness, from the 14-pin down to the 10-pin plug, my phone battery got a little bit low and I needed to put it on the charger, so I threw it on the charger and just continued to work throughout the whole entire night and into the early morning. So I'll show you the progress that I ended up making throughout the night. So I got the one plug here converted and labeled up and ready to go. I've got this plug is ready to go also. All the engine grounds I've got ready to go on a crimped eye loop here for a bolt. Got the distributor plug running directly off of this one, all crimped up nice and heat shrunk together. I've got the coil labeled on this. The other two on here is for my reverse lights, and this other one runs to the 2-wire plug on the distributor. I've got the chart made out for this plug and for the plug that we need to wire up for half of the alternator. That's got the other half of the alternator and all the fuel injectors, the air intake temperature sensor, and the idle air control valve. Then with all the plugs that I decided to use from the Prelude harness that the motor came with, I got each one of those plugs one by one ran with heat shrink wrapped over each wire layer by layer. Made a ground that goes for the both the cooling fan switches, and also the ground for the VTEX pressure switch is all ran right here. I've got it running over the coils, running back over here next to the other fan plug, running through my bracket over here, and I've got all of these wires are all labeled and ready to be wired up to the coinciding engine plugs that they need to go to. And I need to run the O2 sensor pigtail off into this area. Then I can start wiring up all the plugs and work on the other half of the harness, which has the alternator, the air intake temperature sensor, our crank and distributor stuff that's going to be done very last, and the idle air control valve along with the 4 fuel injectors. And once we get all of that stuff ran, we'll be able to wire up all the rest of our plugs and get this portion of the wire tuck finished up. Engine harness is done and I'm pretty happy with it. Now we can move on to the next phase of the project and get the engine bay ready to get painted and get the body harness laid in, so we can start doing the wire tuck on the actual car itself. Then we can get a seal kit and do all the things we need to do on the motor, and by the time we're done with everything in the car, we'll be able to drop the motor in and work on the suspension and brakes and all the rest of the fun stuff along with the interior. That's gonna do it. Thank you guys for watching. Keep sharing these videos. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here. Until next time, peace out.